Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. We have once again the one and only Miss Lynette Zang, who's been gracious enough to give us her time and join us for yet another engaging financial discussion on all things reset, precious metals, and the like. So we'll be interested, as always, to gain and glean her insights accordingly. If you are new to the podcast, please, as always, do like, subscribe, and share so that others can gain the knowledge you've been afforded. As you know, Lynette is CEO of Zang Enterprises and has well over 60 years in the financial service industry and precious metals, and is also our purveyor of land and resources and becoming your own private Western Central Bank, which we agree. And so we're honored once again to have the one and only Miss Lynette Zang. How are you doing today, my dear?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that incredible introduction.
Well, thanks. I'm glad I could get it out in one spaced out sentence fragment. So as always, we have a lot to talk about. No shortage of things in this day and age, of course. But I want to start things with a little bit, Lynette, of reverse engineering, if you don't mind, just on a personal level, because we don't really start with this, but I think it's noteworthy. And that is, in researching a little bit about you, I understand that you founded the Jewel of Encanto Farm in Phoenix, where you live, or in that adjacent area. I viewed your Facebook page and I saw many pictures of chickens, ducks, fruit trees, vegetables, ponds, and the like. Can you tell us a little bit more about this enterprise, and how do you manage in the summer when the temperatures get 115 or higher?
Well, that's a great question. And actually, I started that because I'm not really a gardener or farmer by nature. I consider myself more of an artist, although there is definitely art in that. But in 2008, when Lehman went out, so the great financial crisis, I absolutely knew that that was the death of the dollar as we knew it. And because of all of my studies on currency life cycles and those repeatable patterns, I knew that food becomes the single biggest issue for most people. And so I was living in a little condo, getting ready to retire, where all I had to do is lock the door and off I go. And when 2008 happened, I said, that changed all of my plans. And so what I did after that was I bought this property in Central Phoenix with no homeowners association. And I started to convert that into an urban farm. So I've had the luxury of time, and my first goal really was to feed my family. So maybe create enough food for 20 people. Not like I had a clue how to do it, and I didn't. But thus, $1 million tomatoes. But this is where I developed my mantra, because understanding those repeatable patterns and what happens every time as we transition from one currency into the next, this is how I developed. I said, where do I feel the most vulnerable? And I'd been accumulating gold and silver since 2002. So that is not where I felt the most vulnerable. You know, I felt I needed to feed my family. I needed security. So my mantra developed from that: food, water, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because these are all the things that we need to sustain a reasonable standard of living. And for those people that don't really understand what's happening, and I would say that that's probably a very wide majority of people, when one currency system dies, another one springs up. And I think it should be pretty obvious, especially with the passage of the Genius Act, how they're developing the crypto infrastructure, how they've been developing that and getting people used to it and comfortable, and now legalizing it and pushing it in. This is how they make these transitions. But what most people miss is how violent these transitions end up being for most people. And not only that, they also miss the fact that you have to reset all of that debt in order to shift into a new system. So what gold and silver is about, and I think these things are obvious because I'm paying attention all the time, but I don't think most people it's as obvious. But when one system dies, another one is born. And what physical gold and silver in your possession do is they hold your purchasing power intact so that on the other side of this mess, you actually have your wealth intact. So this is critically important for a properly diversified portfolio to ensure that, because this is, everybody knows this is a wealth transfer mechanism. How many times do we hear that? But what they probably don't know is how that mechanism impacts, well, gosh, in Venezuela, 90% of the population. Usually, globally, on average, it's 80% of the population. But I never said 100% of the population, because those that are in the population, those that are in the know, look at what the central banks are doing. They are accumulating what has risen to the tippy top of the safe haven assets. It's no longer treasuries. It's not dollars. It's not euros. It's not francs, Swiss francs. It's not the Japanese yen. It is gold. It is gold as sound money. And people also don't really understand what it means when I say sound money. I mean, what is sound money? Blah. It is money that cannot be inflated away by governments and central banks. And that is primarily physical gold and secondarily physical silver. And that is because it is used in every single sector of the global economy. So it has the broadest base of functions and the broadest base of demand. And finally, according to the Bank for International Settlements, gold is the only financial asset that runs zero counterparty risk. Zero. So, that's really, and I'm going to be really honest with you, because I am constantly trying to figure out, and we were talking about it this morning, how to present this information in a way that not only can people understand it, because I think I can do that pretty well. However, it's how can they not just understand it, but take it to heart? Because unless they take it to heart, they're not going to move forward and protect themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, wow, Lynette, thank you for the bevy of invaluable information, no pun intended, a lot of gold nuggets to dissect in your thesis alone. But really, it was truly, for those who are listening, your audience, obviously well-heeled as is mine, and picking these things apart. Let's examine that for a minute, Lynette. 2008, 17 years later, what are we going to go through again? Except now it's on a global scale. Gold is God's money. There's more of it than plenty of it. The US, Philippines, China, Russia, Zimbabwe, it's replete and awash everywhere you go. It can be the backstop, especially when I believe that we're going to remove the Fed and implement the gold standard to reset the debt and get real money back into the equation again. It's the only way we can save this economy or reset it, to your point. And it'll be a great, as you said, barter-billy instrument for food, water, and plethora of other denotes the others, right? As far as I don't know if that was a speculative question, you were sort of thinking out loud how to help people. I think unfortunately what you're trying to do, what I'm trying to do, is we talked about this before, get more people a seat at the table to minimize the collateral damage. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, I think for the lion's share of the public, they're not going to take action until they have to take action. And at the point that they're doing that, the water is already at the door. You're just trying to, maintain status quo of what you're going to lose. So, I think one piece at a time, like an elephant, is the only way you can do it. So thank you for that. So you've been in, as a good segue, you've been in this business a long time, as I said, since I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, 1964-ish. You've experienced as a banker and a stockbroker. So you know how the old system was, and I think you know how the new system will be. And we'll talk about cryptos, as you rightly put it, a little later. Can you tell us what made you leave the corporate world to begin recommending gold and silver? Was it a gradual separation, or was there some seminal event or moment that caused you to change course?
Well, I can't say that I changed course. I think when I look at, I mean, there's absolutely zero doubt in my mind that this is why I was born, and that the universe or God or however we put it, there's definitely, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. And I know that I have been guided to this moment. So I can't say that there was exactly a seminal moment, though I can clearly remember how all of a sudden I understood what I was looking at, right? But first you have to understand the language. And then you also have to understand the motivation of those that are in charge. And you also have to be open enough and look at things just a little differently. And I think that's what I really try and do, because you know me, I love my charts. I absolutely love them. And the Federal Reserve Education Department, the FRED, is frankly my very favorite site. I am there all the time, because not that I think that it's 100% accurate, but I think it gives me a much clearer understanding of what's really happening out there. And, you know, I mean, as a technician, look, if I had never become a stockbroker or banker, I wouldn't understand the language. But as a stockbroker at Shearson in the 80s, when we were starting globalization, I can remember going, you know, I can kind of see some problems in the future with this. And now in all areas except for financial, we are going through deglobalization, right? And this is necessary because it all systems always get abused. There are very brilliant people out there, very genius people out there that can take what's happening and influence the lawmakers for their benefit. And we gave our power up a long time ago when we allowed, because we have to allow it, we allowed them to take sound money out of our system, first the gold in 33 and then the silver in 65. The commodity money that gave the public the power, especially the gold, because if you didn't like what they were doing, you would walk in with dollars and walk out with gold, and that requires fiscal responsibility. So as a technician and as a stockbroker, I had the ability to talk to the head of any trading desk. And one day, if I hadn't been doing this, I'm telling you, I would be absolutely clueless. But one day I stumbled across, I can't even tell you how, non-dollar denominated bonds. Those are just bonds that are issued in different currencies. But if I was going to sell them to a client, I needed to understand them first so I could explain it. And that led me to talk to the head of currency trading at Shearson. And that woman was absolutely genius. And that's the way I started my day. Every day was with a conversation with her. And then she would give me homework and I would study it. And the next morning we'd have a discussion on it. And as I was learning and understanding about currencies, I started to see these repeatable patterns, these things that happen 100% of the time. That's life-changing. When you start to see these, you go, what's going on here? If you're curious, and I happen to be a curious person, I also happen to have been groomed to stand up to bullies. And I consider the Federal Reserve and the governments to be huge bullies. And they use their leverage and they use their clout for their benefit when they're supposed to be using it for our benefit. And that's the way it was in the Constitution, where the individual was the head. And then states were there to support the rights of the individual, and then the federal government was there to support the states that are there to support the individual. And have we not seen that flip-flopped? And how did that flip-flop? Because we gave up our flipping power. We have to take that power back, and we can do it peacefully by just converting this money that's controlled, its value that is stated and controlled by the government and the central banks, into sound money that's above their control. because it has the broadest base of market everywhere. One place. And you look at what they're doing now, transitioning us into an even broader kind of fiat system with less privacy, less control. And you know what else you happened to catch me after we just had this big conversation. So I'm a little hot right now, right? Because it's so critically important, the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, because how many times can you be lied to and you do not know the truth?
Mhm.
But then the question becomes, how can you explain this in a way that people can, number one, see it, and number two, believe it, so that they have the ability to take action that puts their best interest first? Frankly, community has become everything to me, everything, because I've had this luxury of time and money, to be honest with you, where I've developed the mantra, and I have a bug out location, and I have a community around me because I understood what happened in 2008. Most people don't have that, and they don't have the luxury of time anymore, even if they have the luxury of money, because it takes both. It just takes both. And so we have to come together in local community to create security and surety in food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. We've got to create that surety so we can sustain a reasonable standard of living. But on the other side of it, we have to go ahead and create that global community just by converting your fiat into sound money so that we can say no. Because if we are independent and we become our own central banks, even inside a community, then when the government and the central banks want to surveil us and say, we don't like what you're saying, like we saw in Canada, when they, boom, shut down all the accounts of the bankers at the trucker strike, the legal trucker strike.
Yep.
And let me tell you, I see so many shades of what was happening in the 60s and the 70s when we were transitioning off a gold standard into a debt standard. Like all of these troops being called out, my sister Elena was billy clubbed at Kent State in the 60s. Right? I mean, I see, so I'm going to do a piece on it. I think that's going to be my key piece this weekend on what happens as we're making these transitions. What are those repeatable patterns that I can clearly see? And I'm hoping, and if I don't, I always want to know. And because honestly, this isn't a new quest of mine. This has been my quest forever. You know, I feel such urgency to help people understand what's happening so that they can take the appropriate steps, secure their current standard of living, and my goodness, even be in a position to have the wealth transfer their way, because wealth always transfers. This is a wealth transfer mechanism. What a concept, having the wealth transfer to the public. And we can do this. I sometimes, and John, you've known me for a while, and so I think you've probably been observing the evolution into the community space and into how I'm really trying to reach people. I mean, my urgency level is up here. It's up here. So how do you inspire others to get up there when the system is designed to keep people stupid? Keep people in place, hold their wealth in the system, because it is so much easier to steal it if it's inside the system. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, it's okay. I love your passion, because that's coming from a place of genuinity and care, which is what our respective audiences need to see. So it actually, I think, worked out well that you're coming off the backs of this meeting and sort of injecting that into the excuse me, discussion. Again, for the sake of redundancy, a lot of gold comms in what you shared. It comes down to free will, right? Free will and consent. And as the people step up and say no and counter and push back, that is the most demonstrative and yet peaceful way to do it. You speak with your wallet, you speak with your pocketbook. How many, you talked a couple of years ago about the trucker movement. How did people respond? They started boycotting companies that didn't represent their personal and or political interests or both. So that speaks volumes. But now, again, I think one of the ways that you can help, Lynette, if it was an open-ended question, I don't know, because you're an arbiter of history, people need to understand, in order to understand where we're going, you have to know where we've been.
Yes.
And if you can understand the history and how it just continually repeats itself, you can get ahead of it. And to that end, you being in community is good because you're being proactive in your own personal, also communal interest, because that is where we're going. Because for the lion's share of people who don't change their mindset, I tell my audience this all the time, don't take action, which you and I talk about. And so where you prosper, and that has a multitude of meanings, for the lion's share of people, unfortunately, they're going to be dependent on a communal service, which is good because it gets away from this sort of everybody doing their own thing and entitlement and I got mine to, hey, we actually needed each other this whole time, like we did back in the 50s.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that so much to your point. Absolutely. And history does repeat itself and they know how to make this transition. And I've got to do, I've got to do it better. I mean, I do it all the time, but I've got to do it better. I feel so urgent because I see this all unfolding and I see you catch a wild hog. You give him free food, he goes back to the same place and you slowly put the fencing around him. And before you know it, you're trapped. And excuse me, when you're talking about the importance of community and what happened there, I also believe so strongly, and I think I fell down a little bit on the job yesterday, and I'll get better. I'll get better. You got to recognize where you can, improve.
Sure.
Those that are not paying attention, let's say that it's just going to the historic average. You have 80% of the population that will be in abject poverty. So if the rest of us are in community, I believe that it is our obligation to help those that can't see it because it's not their fault. They were born into the lie. They have been fed the lie their entire lives. We're looking at the younger generation that is realizing what a lie. Oh, you go to school, you get a job, then you retire. You're going to be able to buy a house. You're going to be able to educate your the younger generation is finding out that that's a lie. And they look at my generation, the boomer generation, as if we have three heads and we did something wrong because we had it so much easier. And we did have it easier. Why? Why did we have it easier? Because we had World War II. And, people, even when they'll talk about the loss of purchasing power, between 1913, when they legalized the Federal Reserve and they put inflation into the currency intentionally, and 1971, when that tie to gold was completely broken, we had already lost on the gold standard because of the shift and the lies, 75% of our purchasing power. Why was that okay? But what that did is that put a whole lot more cheap money in the system. And that cheap money inflated away the purchasing power because, this is how they do it. It's easy for them to do that. It lowered the purchasing power, putting more dollars into the system in the benefit of the corporations that then could hire people. And for a while, from World War II until 71, the public did participate in the productivity gains because of all of this inflation. right? I mean, there is a time early in your career where taking on debt and doing that kind of thing is actually economically stimulative, right? But then you reach a peak point where then taking on more debt does the reverse. And that we peaked in that in 97. And so we are at the end, and Jon, if you ever see any of my work, and I'm going to ask anybody out there that's watching, if you see my work and you don't understand something, I mean, seriously, let me know, because I am so trying to figure out how to present this information in a way that you can understand it. It's hard for me simply because I've been doing it my entire life. And so I'll look at something or a word or an action or whatever, and I'll go, well, of course, like, duh. But what I don't necessarily get is how it's perceived by somebody brand new to it. Does it go over their head? Probably. Do their eyes glaze over? Probably. Well, I don't want to present the information in that way, because then it's wasted. I want to present it in a way that as they're starting to drift off, they go, wait, what? And I can catch their attention so they pull on one little thread. Because honest to goodness, once you start digging in even a teeny weeny bit, wow, when you start to look at things just a little differently, it is amazing what you see. I've looked at the same charts thousands of times, but I've been looking at it from this angle or this angle or this angle or this angle or this angle, right? And still, I'll see something all of a sudden that on a graph that I've probably analyzed, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 times, and I'll see something that I never saw before. I go, oh my God. So yeah, the passage of what I just saw, I'm nervous. I can't lie. I'm nervous. Like what I'm seeing. I'm fearful that we are fast running out of time, and people are looking at their statements and go, oh, look, my statement looks okay. And wow, what my cryptos are doing, they're okay.
Right.
It's the lie. It's the Trojan horse. It's to keep you in the system so that when everything collapses, which it will, they'll do that overnight reset.
Oh, yeah.
I can guarantee this.
Yep.
And, and then who are you going to call and complain to? Because I'm still of an age, I remember a day when it was mostly mom and pop. So you were unhappy with something, you went to the person that could make a decision. Tell me how you do that anymore. You can at Zang Enterprises because that's how we operate. But tell me how you can do that anymore. You're not happy with this corporation? Too bad. So sad.
It's true. It's true. Well, I mean, again, sound like a broken record, but a lot to take in with just that subject. And I'm just brainstorming here, but maybe an option is, if you haven't already thought of it, I'm sure you have, is maybe do a 101 symposium class for the beginning student who comes in, so that it's not so over their head. You can get them like in a 101 and phase them in. It's the frog in the pot, helping them understand, hey, do you go to the grocery store? Yeah. Do you go to the gas station? Yeah. You notice that the prices keep going up, but you're not getting any better products or any quantity of products. So what's the common denominator? And then they start thinking, and people know something's wrong, but they don't know how to diagnose it, which is what you and others can be wholly tasked to do. And I'm really glad you said the time frame, Lynette, because while we don't, I don't know if you watch our podcast, but we don't do dates and rates over here. But what we do is prophetic timelines, analysis, folks like you that help contribute to the tenor of that. But I don't think it's going to be too much longer. I really don't. I think it's maybe months at the most, and that's being generous. And it's that frog in the pot, right? You get them so comfortable that by the time they turned up, they don't even notice, because it's in this gradual declination of a standard of living and so forth. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there.
Something else that, I've been talking about, but now I'm able to show.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of working this through.
Okay.
No, I just recently did they may not invite me back anymore, I don't know. But I just did the XRP crypto event, and I was gifted this visual representation of an XRP coin. And I'm sorry, how much like this does it look? Right? This is gold color. This is Ethereum, gold color. This is Bitcoin, right? These are not real things. They had to create physical representations of a digital algorithm that were all supposed to mimic this sound flippin' money. And you talk to people that have married this, and they see all of this stuff the way they would normally have seen this. This is merely mimicking. The image is mimicking this. They want you to think that there's a finite amount, because while you're absolutely right, Jon, there's plenty of this that can back a currency. It just limitations on government and central bank abuse. That's all it does. Do they want that? No, they want to continue to abuse us. They do. But why would you use gold? And why are all these cryptocurrencies gold, silver, or platinum? Why? And why doesn't anybody ask that question? Why aren't they orange and purple and green?
Right. I have a thought about that, Lynette, if you don't mind, real quick, before I go to my next question for you. And I have a kind of a two-part question because it sort of intercorrelates. I think what they're doing is symbolism, because as it becomes convertible, your key buzzword, as they phase them in together, right? Basel III is now kicked in, and a lot of banks are checking out, or branches, because they don't have the gold and silver on the balance sheets. It can't just be a cost-cutting thing. It's much deeper than what they tell us, to your point. So eventually, I think you're going to see gold come into XRP and these cryptos with the Genius Act you mentioned earlier. and so I think they're showing you symbolism of where it's going.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm not really sure that you're right, but I
find out.
Right, we're going to find out, and I hope you're right. I really do, and that is to your point, though, because I really do feel that this is the absolute best time that we've ever had, best opportunity to get, but it's got to be redeemable. If it's not redeemable, then like we saw in Zimbabwe, it means nothing, absolutely nothing.
Agreed, but we're going to talk about Zimbabwe at the end because there's some changes on that as well. Yes, so Lynette, going to this two-part question just for time's sake, so I'm going to pack these in at the same time. So there's a lot going on, obviously, geopolitically, precious metals front, particularly in the LBMA and COMEX, as you know, central banks. And there's a lot going on, as I said, geopolitically with the precious metals front, specifically LBMA and COMEX. As you know, central banks and countries purchasing tons of gold, which you mentioned. I think my listeners would like to know what you think the greatest catalyst currently is in order to drive the price of gold and silver higher. And to that end, gold and silver have had a great run as of late, as you know. Do you see any other asset class that might be worth investing in today?
So I'll answer the last part first. I wish I did, but no, I do not, because we are in a massive transition. What was the first part of the question? The first part.
First part is, just about,
Oh, what I see could drive the price higher. Wait. Okay, you froze.
Tons of gold.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the geopolitical risk is clearly there. And as we were talking about earlier, I see so many parallels to the last transition that we were making, right? The volatility in the markets, the inflation that we're dealing with, the destruction of civil rights issues and women's issues, and the transition into a new system is clearly there. But geopolitical risk, I mean, they haven't formally declared World War III, but according to people that are much smarter on cyber war than I am, we've already been in World War III, but you're looking at Russia and Ukraine, that continues on. We're looking at the Middle East. We'll just lump it all together. That's going, I mean, these are the things that happen 100% of the time as we transition from one system to another. And so I'd say primarily the geopolitical risk. You're looking at oil that shot up in the Middle East. That's going to have an impact. But yeah, it's the geopolitical risk that's out there that will drive it. But even if it pushes the prices higher in what you see, that's only the flipping spot market. That's just a little contract. It doesn't really mean anything because it is not reflective of the true fundamental value. I did a piece not that long ago on the difference between intrinsic value, which is what the markets want you to think of as fundamental value, but they're different. They're very, very different. The intrinsic value is what the markets declare as value. So all of these derivative products, all of these new products that they create, all of that, right, and have an impact on the visual price because they're all contracts. And therefore, they are all total counterparty risks, and they do not reflect the true fundamental value. Now, what's the fundamental value? It's the value of an asset based on the single most important function that it performs. For gold and silver, the most important function that these two commodity monies perform is to hold your purchasing power intact. We have not had a test on the cryptos yet. That comes in. Forget the crypto winter. The real test will be much colder than that. This has been tested for thousands of years. And when you look at this test, they have passed. And so even at 3,500, even with silver breaking out, and I do think that silver is going to technically conclude its cup, but the reality is the true fundamental value of this is somewhere in the vicinity of $40,000 today. And the more of this that they do, the higher that number will go. It's just a number. Right? This will hold this keeps your purchasing power intact. So, as example, food basket, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, between 1913 and 1925, because I just ran these numbers Friday. Okay, so I just ran these. That food basket was up a bit more than 2,500%. Spot silver was up well over 3,600%, so it maintained your ability to buy the same exact thing. Spot gold was up over 16,000%. So not only did it maintain its ability to buy the same thing, but it actually expands your opportunity to have the wealth transferred your way. When will it go to that 40,000 or God knows, by the time it could go to 3 trillion. It's just a number. And by the way, 3 trillion times zero in terms of purchasing power value is still zero. That's why I have a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note in here. I'm a trillionaire there, but I can't buy an egg with it, right? So
temporarily,
it'll happen not by Wall Street, but by the extreme need that the government will have to get the confidence of the public back. That's what they tried to do in Zimbabwe, but the 6th iteration, their credibility is destructoed. It just is, it's gone. The public does not trust them. Now, if they did a convertible gold into the new currency, now you can gather some more trust. But they didn't do that. It's everything. They couldn't even hold their principal intact with a physical bill. Everything was digital and garbage. So, what do I see? I see lots more inflation, and that will destroy the rest of the confidence, the little bit of hopium that is yet in the public, that this crap cannot help but regain some of its purchasing power. That's psychological. That's not reality. It never regains its purchasing power. The best that we can hope for is that it loses it a little more slowly than it did before. And then that gives people hope, hopium, that, okay, things are getting back to normal. But they never do. They never, ever do. They never, ever do.
Right. So thank you. Thank you for that one. I love how you said in sort of the geopolitical realm, it's ultimately, the Strait of Hormuz, it's going to look a certain way, but then they're going to make a deal and it's going to go and wind the other way because that's always moves and counter moves. And then ultimately, all this geopolitical stuff is just basically hyperbole for distraction. Look here and not here, because they don't want the public to know this wealth transfer is happening because it mitigates the collateral damage, right? If everybody knew the reset was coming with metals and cryptos and currencies and other things, they wouldn't be buying that. They'd be stuck in the system, which is what you said earlier, right? So they'll let the 1% to 2% go because it's better than the 90 plus. But again, what we're wholly tasked to do, and I know you likewise, is to get people's eyes on the right things, stay on the bullseye, and not be diverted by all these sidebars.
Yes.
So glad you said that. Actually, I had a couple of questions there that pick up what we've talked about in the past. So it's a good reprise. We now see that Brazil has welcomed Vietnam formally into the BRICS earlier this week. Plus, Vietnam is now quietly showing their hand as to how much they truly have in terms of gold reserves, as you mentioned before. So you and I talked about this last year, and this is the reprise part. You and I sort of had this friendly debate about when would BRICS reach its tipping point. And I think we were both right. It started last year, but I think it's now hitting its pantheon this year. So as the BRICS gets stronger and stronger over the course of the year with roughly 100 countries in tow, what does that signify to you in terms of the law of diminishing returns for the Fed dollar, as well as the strength of foreign currencies under the auspices of BRICS?
Wow, what a great question, especially where we are in the formation of stable coins.
Right.
Supposed to then artificially maintain and actually expand the dollar's prevalence and relevance, let's say the relevance. So it's a battle royale. And what we're really witnessing, and I'd even say voluntarily so, is the transfer of power, of financial power from the US and the West to the East.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I see. It's a consolidation, and you need, because of the level of the presumed level of gold that we have and clout that we have. But all those lines are being redrawn, and that's part of this transition. So the addition into the BRICS nations, I don't think the BRICS are coming out with a gold-backed currency. They still aren't really talking about that, but they are creating those bridges to make buying and selling from those different currencies much easier. That cross-border monetary, the cash flow. I still think that we need something much bigger, like the universal money from the SDR, or the IMF's SDR, I should say, the special drawing rights, because that has the ability to encompass just be this huge umbrella, right, to encompass every single currency on the planet, and then easily transfer it into each local currency, so that people don't realize that anything has changed when everything has changed, because that's the way they do it.
Absolutely. And I just saw an article I sent to one of your colleagues this morning. She'll share with you about the SDR. Funny enough that you should mention that, ironic, getting into that point. But with the BRICS unit, and I think as we go back to as we've talked about before, rewinding the mistake by both Nixon and God, I can't think of his name right now. It's this, you would remember, Kissinger. Kissinger, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Henry.
Yeah, I had to think about that. It was a little before my time. But Kissinger and Nixon, unwinding that mistake and going back to U.S. note, I think will be a way that the BRICS can disentangle from the Fed dollar, allowing the U.S. to reflourish again with actual precious metals, to your point. So another complementary question, Lynette, as we see commodities market, I think, telling a very clear and present story. Gold is up, silver is up. Interestingly enough, I don't think enough people are talking about this. I'm really dying to get your take on it. The Dixie is going down. Last week it was below 98 into the 97. So it's doing this seesaw effect. And we kind of think it's going to go into the 80s and low. Okay, yeah. So talking about the Dixie going down, we think it can dip in as a team to the low 80s. And then we talked about the massive oil spike temporarily with the Strait of Hormuz closing up, which will be rejiggered properly with the drilling here back stateside. How do you see this all playing out in the weeks ahead? And what story does this tell you?
Oh, gosh. Well, the funny thing is bringing up the Dixie, it was the Dixie that gave me an indication in, I believe it was July of 2007. Now, I'd been watching these markets implode, the derivative markets implode through Bear Stearns and all of that prior to this. But it was in July of 2007 when the dollar fell to its all-time low. So it made a brand new low. And when I saw that, I'm telling you, it freaks me out. And then I started telling people that this is a signal. This is it. And we've got to be prepared. And I had that weekend, right after it happened, I had a sibling retreat up in Vancouver. And I never really talked to my family about this because they always thought I was crazy anyway. But when I said that I was concerned about what I just saw with the dollar dropping to the all-time low against its trade-weighted basket, they're like, "Oh, you're crazy. This is the best the economy has ever been." Well, P.S., there are signals that you get way ahead of time. And keeping in mind that central banks and governments want distance between their policies and how and when it's introduced to the public. In 2022, we saw the Federal Reserve shift a 44-year-old trend cycle when they ratcheted up those interest rates, because for 44 years, the trend was a downtrend. That permanently shifted the bond market in a structural way. Now, the reason why that's important to what you asked me is because that's how dollars are created, and the strength of particularly the 10-year treasury is the foundation of the global markets. So when that happened, I knew something nasty this way comes. I didn't really know exactly what it was going to be, honestly, but I was paying attention, which is why I knew the system died in 2008. So let's fast forward to today. 2022 is when that structural shift in the bond market happened. But ever since then, what have we been witnessing in these markets? Wow, stock market and bond market is going down at the same time. That's not supposed to happen. The dollar and gold. Wow, that there are all these shifts in patterns that they had set up into the system that have broken down. So when I see the dollar falling against the trade-weighted basket, there are a couple thoughts that pop into my head. Number one is all of the dollar-denominated debt that the third world countries have taken on that they must repay in dollars. So a stronger dollar against that currency means that that debt is a whole lot more expensive to service. So it is a tool. And when we in this country get upset about another country manipulating their currency, well, we all manipulate our currency, and anybody that thinks differently needs to go in and just look at all the derivatives on the currencies and all the central banks' balance sheets. And then you can see it for yourself, and you don't have to take anybody's word for it. But, this is it. I mean, the world is turning away from dollars. The world is turning away from the U.S. debt. And that creates this very dangerous doom loop because it is that 10-year treasury debt that underpins the global financial system. Mm-hmm. We've got the need. I mean, if this big, beautiful bill transpires, that's 2.4 additional dollars worth of trillion dollars worth of debt to the deficit that's already at 1.8 trillion. And I just pulled this graph again on the Fed. If you go ahead and look at the interest that they pay, that we pay on this debt, what you see after 2020 is an exponential rise up, because that's what these higher interest rates do. So this is the death knell for the dollar as the world reserve currency. And you brought up Henry Kissinger and his famous quote, "It is not what is true that needs to be believed. It is what is presumed to be true that matters." And so that is perception management. If they can manage how you perceive things, if you cannot envision a day when this dollar doesn't exist, they'll keep the name. They just change everything underneath it.
Right.
Then you keep your wealth in the system. If it looks like the stock market is going up, then you think everything is okay, because we were taught that the stock market is an indication of how the economy is doing. So, I think the lies are being revealed, and the loss of the value of the dollar against other currencies is a harbinger for the U.S. losing that status, and for this next crisis with the underpinning of the U.S. debt. It's like, if those foreign holders don't buy enough of our debt, the Federal Reserve has to buy that to keep it appearing like everything is okay. So I'm looking for that shift. And do I really trust that they're telling us everything and that what we're seeing is real?
Of course not.
Their job is to lie. That's their job.
The beauty of what we can do, Lynette, is we can see what they're doing from experience, from different gleaning of insights, and go counterintuitive to help our audiences go counterintuitive. I loved your analogy about they could change the name of the dollar, but it's still, or keep the name the same, but everything structurally. It's a lot like a band that changes their members but keeps the name. Is it still that same band? No, but it looks that way. So,
I think this is a very interesting exercise. Let me do a little exercise for you guys, because it's just really fascinating.
Okay.
In the beginning, there was this. Oh my gosh, I have to carry it in my pockets. I carry it in mail pouches. It can get stolen. How inconvenient. Let's keep it in the bank, and we could just use this. This is a $20 gold certificate. So you could walk into the bank with this and walk out with this. Okay, this is just the same as this. But at the same time, at the same purchasing power value, they gave us Federal Reserve notes. And I think you could see how similar this looks to this, right? So we had these three things in circulation for 20 years. When did Bitcoin come out? 17 years ago? Interesting. Takes a while to do this. So when they took this away, we were still left with this. People didn't realize anything had changed because they were used to using this at the same level of purchasing power for 20 years. It's the same thing we're doing today.
Yep.
I'm glad. Make it easier.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, Lynette, we're on the same page, because I had taken some notes while you were sharing earlier a moment ago. 17 years. What's that represent? 2008 to 2025. Here we go again with, a reset, but now it's not going to be this little microfraction bailing out issue anymore. It's going to be much larger. They can't control the dam anymore. And then also adding to the mix, Lynette, the Fed 10, 30-year Treasury bond yields. No one's talking about that world. Few are talking about that. You and Greg, for instance. Countries aren't buying it. They're going away from it. They're dumping it in favor of precious metals. So the writing's on the wall. So do the opposite of what they're telling you in parlance. Okay, so last question for today, and this is the piece de resistance one. I covered everything else. As you know, interestingly enough, Argentina has had a recent public story about finding massive amounts of gold and silver that were once clandestine to the public, to your point. Additionally, Zimbabwe has announced that they have over 40% of the world's gold reserves, and the IMF, while corrupt, has expressed their severe interest for Zimbabwe to go back all of their assets under the Newsic system. Now, I know it has to be convertible and all that. And I also think there's going to be regime change going on, like there's going to be in Iran, in Zimbabwe, and many other countries. As that happens, how encouraged are you about seeing it be more credible with gold conversion?
I actually, that's what I was saying earlier, John. I really think this is our best opportunity to take our power back.
Yeah.
Honest to goodness, with all of this chaos, and it's really scary, but I love all of that. We'll see what Zimbabwe does, because presumably the ZIG was 40% backed. But if it was actually backed by 40%, what did they do? Did they reset all the other currencies that were inside of it to zero, which is mostly dollars? No, they probably didn't do that. That's what has to be redeemable, because the only way you can hold the government's toes to the fire is if you could take something that they need away from them. And it ain't the vote. We vote with our wallets.
Correct.
So I am definitely encouraged, though I'm going to admit something, because when I hear that goes to the global, community and developing that to convert this garbage that they know is losing value into this sound money. We get enough of them on a global basis, enough people to do that. 3% of the 8.4 billion in the population. Let's have a seat at the table. Let's use this opportunity to take our power back. We can do this. And as insane as sometimes I hear coming out of my mouth, that what I'm really trying to do here is change for the better the global monetary system. And I go, who am I? Right? I'm just one little person, but together we can do it. 3%, because we all say that. We all say, but what can I do? I'm just one person. And that's true. One person cannot do it. But I'm part of the Sound Money Movement Advisory Board. I travel on a global basis speaking about this, which is why I need to get better and better and better at it. And I am so focused on doing that. And hopefully more times successfully than not. But yes, I see this happening. I see the opportunity, and I see how community has been destroyed, and they started doing that in the 70s, and that's a whole nother conversation. And then what happened during the COVID years with everybody being completely separated, and how everybody is so political, disagreeing with one side or the other and really trying to fight this. And oh, by the way, the run on the dollar began in 2013, when both Japan and China stopped buying as much of the treasuries, allowed them running off their balance sheet, and dare I say it, even liquidating some. So they're not buying as much. And that's very similar to the run on gold that we experienced again, going in the 60s. So this is the opportunity to take our power back. I don't know when we'll have another opportunity like this again, because if we allow what they have in mind, which is a full surveillance economy,
bad news.
It's gonna break my heart. I'm telling you right now. And it's not for me, because I have plenty. I'm not really worried about my children, because I'm leaving a legacy, but I am worried about your children. I'm worried about everybody's children, because they will have no choices. They will have no opportunities. We will be back in feudal times where you just have a handful of the few that own everything. And what did the WEF say? By 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And that goes to tokenization. I mean, John, we could talk for another 5 days and we probably still wouldn't.
Sure. Right. Agreed. But again, Lynette, just to summarize, we're doing our part to effectuate change in our respective communities. We're doing synergy, having these conversations in our communities right now, bringing more people to the table. There's more of us than them, and that's where our safety is in our numbers and our unification instead of the division that they wanted to cause, which you rightly articulated. And also I'm encouraged because as we see regime changes in Iran, because those people have been shut out by the revolution, they're getting a seat back, as you said, the timing. Nelson Chamisa is emerging as the people's president, not Emerson Mnangagwa, who was hired by Cyril Ramaphosa. And you saw how corrupt he was a few weeks ago with President Trump at the White House, got absolutely called out and obliterated. And that was, of course, on purpose. I'm encouraged because I'm seeing that regime change happen systemically throughout the world, to include Zimbabwe, with 40% gold backing it, actually backing it, and putting their resources to use. Not to mention that they also have 10% of the world's water supply, goes back to food, community, and water. They also have, I believe it's platinum and chromium, 90% of the world. And so they've got a lot to bring to the table. Their greatest strength, what's that?
Well, I was going to say, at one point, Zimbabwe was one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
Yeah. And if history repeats itself, it will be again.
It very well could be, but it's got to be redeemable. Otherwise, it's garbage.
I agree, but I think I'm with you, but I think one of the ways to do it is the regime change and synergy, to your point, because they're getting tired of it. You know what I mean? That's how I think that's one of the ways, the best, easiest way to achieve it. But, and I agree with you. We are absolutely at the pinnacle, the pantheon of timing here in the summer over the next couple of months to take that power back. And all we can do is hopefully get as many people on the boat as possible. So we appreciate you, Lynette, as always. Last thoughts that you have for the audience, and where can people find your work, please?
Well, I would say that a lot of times people are procrastinating. There's so much chaos that's going on, and a confused mind does nothing. But you need to understand that doing nothing is a choice, and it is not a choice that will serve you well, because you just need to think logically for a minute. What is wrong with holding physical gold and physical silver? Booty, hooty, Rudy, Manooty. They have the broadest base of anything. So what I would really like people to understand is this is not a good time to procrastinate. 100% of the time, you can always convert your gold and your silver into whatever that local currency is. So get it now. Let that become your own central banker, and do what they're doing for themselves, even though they want us to do something different, right? Do what I say and not what I do. Do what they do, right? Do what they do. They're buying physical gold and holding it to protect and preserve their freedom and their purchasing power. So don't procrastinate anymore. Worst thing that happens is you're sitting and you're holding gold and silver. Booty, hooty, Rudy, Manooty. But they can find my work on YouTube and on Twitter at the Lynette Zang, Instagram and Facebook at Lynette Zang, or the website LynetteZang.com. And also we like phone calls, because we do have a human connection, and everybody is empowered to make everybody wants to make a difference. 833-GLDZANG or 833-453-9264.
Perfect. And I always have asked Lynette in the past, before we go, I've always asked banks when I've sat with them, whether it's branch managers, wealth managers, I'm like, hey, answer me one question. Gold and silver aren't worth anything. Why do you guys want it so badly? Why are you stacking on your balance sheets? They never have an answer to that. So.
Oh, it's tradition. Oh, I've seen you doing a whole lot of stuff that isn't traditional.
Right. Well, again, they'll call it a barbarous relic. And I'm like, again, why are you stockpiling it if you feel that way and telling us to do the opposite? Just saying.
Just because I found this so darn entertaining.
Sure.
I was on a new channel, which I'm not going to mention the name of it, but I was on a new channel that was really primarily about stocks and cryptos and things like that. And he referred to me as a gold bug. A bug is kind of like a derogatory name, but those of us that believe in gold, we're used to being called names. I turned around and called him a stock snake nicely. I did it nicely. Not very insulted. And I think that was so telling, because that's how they nudge you. They manipulate the price of gold that you see. They manipulate the price of silver. Why anybody believes Wall Street about anything anymore, I have no idea. I sure don't.
Right.
These are all of the things that they do to move you away. Bitcoin coming out in January of 2009, looking like a gold coin in its imagery, right? These are all things to keep you away from the real stuff that you hold, you own, and runs no counterparty risk.
Yeah. And, again, it's, like you said, do as I say, not as I do, but just go counterintuitive to them at the end of the day. And I think we're going to be in a great place. So appreciate you, Lynette. We'll leave that link in the description as always, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the not too distant future as things really come to a boil. So thanks again for all your cogent and priceless advice.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I really do appreciate working with you on this.
Likewise, and we'll see you soon.